Whenever I'm saying something on the air, I'm happy to have you disagree with me. I'm happy to go back and forth with you. Keep it civil. I put my Twitter handle there. By the way, follow me if you don't already. Talk a lot on there during the week with a lot of you, at LateKickJosh. But I also put my email address there if you have a lot more to say. So a guy by the name of Lee reached out to me this week. Let me go back. So the other night, we were doing Q&A at the end of the show. That was episode number 12, I believe. That was on Thursday night. And someone asked me, and it was really quick. I didn't really dive into it. I wanted to dive into it just a little bit more tonight, so I'm going to spend about 5 minutes on this. Someone asked, essentially, what's your opinion? Lane Kiffin, Mike Leach, who's better equipped to succeed in the state of Mississippi? I think the question was worded, who could own Mississippi? But I just took it as, who's going to succeed more? And I said Lane Kiffin. And very quickly, my reasons were, I think Kiffin's the better recruiter. I think he's going to have more success recruiting in-state. I think his brand is going to play better out of state. And I also think that offensively what he does is more tailored to work in this conference. He's got familiarity, but so does Mike Leach. So that's not necessarily an edge for Kiffin. What I think he does is offensively, he does something that translates probably to more success in this conference. So someone took exception to that. Lee took exception to that. And I'm happy to read what he said here. Let's just go point for point. Because a lot of times people get really aggravated and they type, and then people get aggravated in their response, and you don't really get anywhere. So I'm going to read this point for point, take a couple of minutes here, and I'm going to respond. This is the email Lee sent. Really appreciate it. I'm a Mississippi State grad. I've heard you state at least twice that Kiffin is the better hire than Leach. Mississippi State has traditionally been a power run and strong defensive team. Ole Miss is more of a throw-first team without a strong defense, kind of like the Big 12. I believe you've bought into the media hype that Ole Miss has a national brand and is better than Mississippi State because of this. Neither of these programs have national brands. In football and basketball, neither of them do. Nor is it relevant in any shape, form, or fashion how national your brand is and relevancy when it comes to which one of these head coaches is going to succeed. So that has nothing to do with my opinion, and I never stated that, and I never will. Let's continue. Mississippi State is changing the coach and offensive scheme to be more competitive in the league. The defense, here's where I first take exception, because this is a very bold assumption that I'm not going to go ahead and make. The defense will still be the type that Mississippi State is known for, strong and stingy. Wow, a change in offensive scheme. Who does that over time? Let me see. LSU last year when they went from the power run game to more pro style. And Bama, they've gone more spread instead of depending on just a couple of elite running backs. Let me tell you flat out what it's very foolish to do, and that is compare anything that LSU or Alabama have done to what Mississippi State's going to do. They've got something that you're not going to have in abundance, and those are racehorse athletes. Make no mistake, Mississippi State gets good players. They get really good players. Sometimes they get a few great players. LSU gets a boatload of great players. Alabama gets a boatload of great players. They have a totally different caliber athlete on their roster than you do. Secondly, even teams with better rosters than you, there is no magic button. I think we're going to have to make this point for about the next 10 years. After folks saw what LSU just did, guys, I'm telling you, everyone thinks now, not just fans, I think a lot of folks in administrative and maybe even coaching positions think that because Ed Orgeron was able to do it and you falsely categorize that guy as an idiot because he was able to do it, now all we've got to do is find wherever that magic button is and we press it and we just say, we're going to change offensively. And we make a hire of a guy that's going to change us offensively, and you think that the other constant you had, defense, it just remains the same. You mentioned Alabama. You seen them defensively lately? You're right. They did make an offensive shift at the expense of what? Alabama hadn't dominated defensively. Far from it over the last few years. That's my point. If even Nick Saban is not able to maintain one level while shifting on the other side with far superior athletes, at quarterback and receiver, most notably offensive linemen going to the league left and right, what makes you think that you're able to do it? Because you typed it in one paragraph like it's just that easy. Let's continue. You mentioned the elite defensive back play in the league. What he means here is, I question whether what Mike Leach does, which is very simple, if you ever hear him explain it, if you look at him call plays on Saturday, his play sheet's about a quarter of the size of this piece of paper. It's not because he has it all memorized, it's because there's not really a whole lot to it. The value there is repetition, 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 and doing a few things at such a lethally high level that people can't defend you. In Lubbock, Texas, and in Pullman, Washington. It's my belief that the defensive back play in this league is a whole lot different caliber week to week than what he's been facing, and it's going to show in terms of results. So that's what the emailer Lee here is mentioning. You mentioned the elite defensive back play in the league. It's always been there, and now Mississippi State will be throwing more intermediate routes to the tight ends. And in both cases, mostly linebackers are covering there. So I don't see where your observation has any merit. People say this every year with every team. We're going to throw to the tight end more. We're going to hit more underneath routes. This is such a broad statement. I'm not going to give it a lot of time here. A football game is a whole lot more nuanced than this. That's kind of like saying, we got a little more speed at outside linebacker this year, so we're going to be able to cover those routes out of the backfield. This game is not played in baseball format. They don't score in ones. They score in threes and they score in sevens. And the bottom line is you miss one gap and it's 80 yards to the house and that's 7 points. That could be the difference in a game. And yet you sat there in July and said, hey, this kid at linebacker that's going to solve all our problems. This kid at receiver is going to solve all our problems. A lot more complicated than that. A lot more complex than that. Finally, Lee says, I was living in Knoxville when Tennessee hired Kiffin. My wife and I, as well as most UT fans, couldn't believe the horrible hire. That's false. Most Tennessee fans were absolutely on board with the hire at the time. It's only revisionist history that leads people to talk about how categorically horrible the hire was. Tennessee recruiting was on fire the 1 year Kiffin was there. He pushed Alabama, the eventual national champion, to the wire in Tuscaloosa. An Urban Meyer Florida team that was favored by like 50 points against him, he gave them a pretty stiff challenge in year one. It was one and only year. A lot of people thought Lane Kiffin was about to do work at Tennessee, so please don't give me that. I remember it. Now, I also remember what it was like when he walked out, but I remember what it was like when he was there too. My wife and I, as well as most UT fans, couldn't believe the horrible hire. Kiffin lasted 1 year and bolted to the next hot job. Yes, let's keep that in mind. The University of Southern California offered Lane Kiffin the head coaching job because of what he was doing at Tennessee. He's going to do the same thing at Ole Miss, as it's a lower-tier rebound program that's beneath him. I mean, are we calling Lane Kiffin a bum, but in the very next sentence talking about how this program is beneath him? According to whose mentality? Secondly, there's part of this I can't argue with. There's a lot of proving himself Lane Kiffin has to do. That part I won't argue with. And that part takes some blind faith. I just happen to believe that he's more capable if there is a changing of the lanes, so to speak, if he is maybe a guy that's learned a lot of lessons, say like, for instance, Ed Orgeron did. I'm not calling national championships for Ole Miss, but there was a time where Ed Orgeron was the head coach at Ole Miss. And then he, kind of bounces around in college football, gets the interim job for a cup of coffee at USC, never gets the permanent label. Same at LSU, does get the permanent label, and all people wanted to do was look at his track record as a head coach, and all they had to go on was Ole Miss, and he was terrible there. Does that always mean you're going to be terrible in the future? No, he just won the national championship. So I don't always take your past failures as a coach or as a CEO or as a parent or whatever the case may be as a surefire indication you're going to fail in the future. But yet it also does bear repeating that he has failed in the past, spectacularly in some cases. So in the long run, emailer finishes here, Leach will win 6 to 8 games a year. Pay close attention here. Leach will win 6 to 8 games a year at Mississippi State, which makes all Mississippi State fans happy. That's false, Lee. You know that's false. You're winning 6 games a year, you're not happy. You're winning 7 games a year. Most of you are probably not happy. Here's why you're not happy. You think... I'm going to put words in your mouth here. Some Mississippi State folks that I've spoken to think that the standard here for what Leach should achieve is higher than what Dan Mullen achieved. Dan Mullen, to me, is the best coach that they've had. Go back any era. To me, in the modern era, let's just say the modern era to avoid arguments from 1930s, he's the best coach they've had. He got him to number 1 in 2014, but by and large, they were a team that when they were winning 9 games a year, it was a minor miracle. I think people expect more than that here. I think people expect a higher, consistent caliber of play than they got from Dan Mullen. I think it's just a little unrealistic. So you're telling me 6 to 8 wins a year and everyone's happy. I don't know that I necessarily buy that. So he concludes, in the end, Leach is the better hire. There's a lot of well-thought-out points here. I disagree with them, but I do appreciate the email. I'm still going to stick right now with my notion that I like where Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss are a little bit more.